And I don't know how many of you guys have ever given your testimony or understand the power of the testimony, but the Bible says that we are saved by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of our testimony. The testimony is to encourage others to keep going. Sometimes we think that we're the only ones going through the situation or circumstance, and that is never the case. I try not to use the word never, but it's never the case that you're the only one. You may be one of the few in the region, or in your family, or even in your household, but I can guarantee you're not the only one that is going through what you're going through. And sometimes you need to hear it from somebody else just to encourage you to keep moving forward. And we're going to have one of those testimonies today, and I'm going to step out of the way here and invite a young lady that I've gotten to know that is exceptional, that God's hand is upon, that is serving in this ministry in almost every way possible. And the only reason why it's almost is because if she stretches herself too thin, she can't give her all in what she's doing. So if we can give a round of applause for our dear sister Caroline as she comes, that would be amazing.
Hello. Bear with me. I think I'm losing my voice. Not sure if it's the cold or the nerves, but I'm shaking. But I got this. Okay. I've gone to church my whole life. I'm born and raised, you know. As a child, I was very good at checking off all of the boxes. I read my Bible for 15 minutes every day. I played guitar at church. I sang with my grandma. I was there in my best dress for all the holiday services. I attended youth group, and I went to all the summer camps. I played the part of a Christian. Yet my problems never seemed to disappear. I was a very, very anxious child, to the point it made me physically ill. At 13, I remember crying to anyone and everyone that would listen about how miserable I was. Everyone's answer was to pray. I basically laughed at them because I didn't understand how prayer could help anything. Until someone asked me, "Do you have a religion or do you have a relationship with God?" I didn't want to admit my answer because I realized I was wrong. I started working on my relationship with God, questioning all the things I learned as a child, actually going to him for answers instead of checking off the boxes. I started exploring ways of worship besides reading my Bible, watching the sunset and the stars, listening to all the types of Christian music rather than just the stuff on the radio, learning more about God through the Bible rather than reading to check off a box on the list, watching the clouds move. One of my new favorite things to do is pray on my car rides. I especially love watching all the children grow and learn about God. Since focusing on my relationship and not my religion, I have been set free from anxiety. I no longer lose sleep over my fears because I gave them to God. Currently in my life, I'm at a point where I'm going through a really big transition. I graduate high school in May. Everyone's question is, are you going to college? I easily let my flesh take over, and I began seeking man's opinion, going, what do you think? Where do you think I should go? Let's just say it led to a lot of tears. It wasn't until I went to God that I got true peace about my decision. Praying and asking for direction has led to many amazing moments in my life, like being homeschooled, restarting the children's ministry here, having conversations with friends, and amazing Bible studies. I know God has an amazing future for me, and until he reveals that to me, I will continue to praise him and learn more about him. I may not be checking off the boxes now, but I believe that my relationship with God is more important than checking off all of those boxes. Thank you.
Before you step down, what did you guys hear in her testimony? Give me a word. Relationship. There was a transition, huh? Okay. Truth. If you could sum up your testimony in just a few words, how would you do that? Amen. Thank you. You know what's interesting is I was one of the people that asked her, like, what are you going to do after you finish high school? Because I would rather poke the bear than to have the bear either run away because I don't know why or attack me and I'm not ready. But I think sometimes the questions we ask can either start a conversation or stir up something on the inside of us that we really weren't prepared for. And I'm so glad that I have a relationship with our sister here that it started a conversation. But I think as we talk through things and as we transition into different phases of our lives, there's one constant that we have to get closer to, and that's God. We have to get closer to Him and allow parts of us to die, and that is so uncomfortable. I mean, think about it. You guys came in here hoping it was going to be warm. Sorry. Boiler's out again. But you guys are sitting and focused. Why? I'm not going to give you anything that you haven't heard before. But I hope that by the time I'm done, I've helped you to start a transition of your perspective. So, no matter what we go through, to get help means you got to ask for it. For many of us, like myself, I don't like asking for help. Some of you guys know I've been fighting and slowly getting over pneumonia. See, last time I was preaching on the first day of this year, I was talking about how I was dizzy. You guys remember that? If not, the video's up online. I talked about I was really dizzy, and I thought it was because of an injection that I had in my back, not knowing and not understanding that it was my blood pressure. And see, for me, I'm like, well, let me just eat better. Let me just hydrate more. Let me make sure my exercise is focused on the cardiovascular strength and that I'm focusing on areas that are going to kind of boost my blood flow. Make sure I'm resting more. You guys heard that, right? Me. I'm going to do this. None of that worked. So I had to humble myself. I had to get on blood pressure medicine. And then I came up with a plan. And I said, look, a couple weeks of this, and I'm going to get off of this. I am going to get off of this. And then one of my brothers said, why is it that you submitted and humbled yourself to the plan that God had for you, and you still want to submit yours? Maybe it's just me, but oftentimes God sets us on a path, and then we start looking for off-ramps, and we start trying to put in other destinations along the way in hopes that that destination or that off-ramp actually fulfills us. And what happens? The GPS starts to make some noise and say, U-turn. Turn here to get you back on track. And what do? Because it's a shiny thing, we hear U-turn and we hear my turn instead. I know where I'm at. I can get around this. And if anybody's ever driven in D.C., look. I have the GPS on the dash, and I have the JPS on the passenger side. The JPS is my Jenny positioning system because she knows D.C. Sometimes we need to humble ourselves to the people that have been there, done that, and have overcome. But our perspective has to change first. If we don't change our perspective, what ends up happening is we grow callous to a word. We grow callous to encouragement. We grow callous to love. And here's the area that we all love growing callous to: correction. See, if we're okay with where we're at, and somebody says, let me show you something different, most of the time, our first response is this, instead of this. But maybe it's just me. See, when I preach to myself, and I pray to God that it lands on somebody. I've learned so much being here at Oasis that some of you guys know I started a YouTube channel because I got a lot to share. But the reality is this, that's a whole nother perspective. That's a whole nother transition. That's a whole nother endeavor that I had to say, okay, God, if this is what you want me to do, I'll do it. What is it in your life that God has either brought you through, has you in, or is pointing you towards that you still want your own way in? Those are rhetorical questions. Those are things to think about. Because the guy that you see up here shouldn't be up here. I know some of us here, and y'all been in church long enough. This is what God did. No, I should be dead. Not just because I should be here. No, I should not be alive. My mother was kicked in her stomach when she was 8 months pregnant with me. I should have died then. When the doctors couldn't find my heartbeat for over 3 days, the only reason why I stayed in her stomach is because I have a stubborn mother. I shouldn't be here. So I was born with 3 broken ribs, and I have a constant reminder of why I should not be here. But see, my perspective was wrong. I thought because my mother was kicked in the stomach, I clearly don't have value. And it wasn't until I received Jesus Christ that I realized that the enemy wanted to take me out because he's afraid of what's coming. See, I could be a general in his army, been there, done that, or I can let God raise me up. I can take my life experience and have the perspective of, see, no value. See, that's how they're going to treat me because they don't see any value in me. See, all these things have happened to me, so I must not be worth it. That person doesn't know how to talk to me. See, not worth it. That person tries to hurt me. See, not worth it. That didn't go right. See, not worth it. That hurt. That doesn't look good. That doesn't feel good. And we have all these different things, and all I want to say today is wrong perspective. Now I'm going to ask a question. I need some feedback. If you could describe who God is in one word, what word would you use? Come on. Let me hear something from the back. What word would you use to describe God? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I like those. Those are the common ones. Today we're going to talk about one we don't talk about much. He's sovereign. He is sovereign. That means he is completely in control. It is either he that did it or he that allowed it. And if he allowed it, it means he's going to use it. See, some of us have testimonies that would make most of us blush. I remember talking to a pastor, and he heard my testimony. He said, man, I can't wait till my congregation is ready to hear your testimony. And I thought in my head, maybe if they heard my testimony, they would actually be ready for more. See, I want to shift us away from legalism and these mindsets that says you can't because we've never done. Let me say that again. We have to shift our mindset from we can't because it's never been done to we can because of who our Father is. Sometimes we look at what's going on in the Eastern Shore, and I don't know about you, but it breaks my heart. We don't have anything for our youth to do. We don't have anything for our littles to do. They bring these little programs and things here, and yet if we're honest, and a lot of us, I'm looking around, a lot of us have little kids because they're up there and some of them are perched. Wouldn't you wish that somebody would actually think about what a family would need? But if you trust God and you link yourself to what he's doing, maybe he's saying, I'm allowing you to see what is needed because I need you to move. Because many times we feel hopeless because we haven't conquered much. That's what we think. I wonder how we would feel if we really thought about some of the stories that we've read in the Bible, like Joseph. Who knows the story? Joseph. What happened to Joseph? I'm asking for some. Yeah, we all want feedback. I want us to have a conversation today. His brothers sold him. What else? Falsely imprisoned. What else? Okay, we skip to the end. What else happened to Joseph? He had dreams. Okay. Okay. Didn't lose his faith. Terry said that he forgave his brothers. But one thing that he did before that, if you read throughout his story, there's something that is said about Joseph that I want to be said about me and all of us here. That God was with him. See, I can ask the question, is God with you? And on the surface we'll say, of course. The follow-up is usually a lot tougher to answer. If he's with you, what is he doing in you? And what does he want to do through you? If he's with you, if he's with us, then that means we're more than conquerors. We're victorious. We're loved, forgiven, filled with a spirit that raised Jesus from the dead. More powerful than anything and anyone. And yet, who feels powerful in here? I know I don't. My back pain reminds me of my physical weakness. Me struggling to take pills that would make me feel better reminds me of my mental and spiritual weaknesses. And yet, I'm here to tell you, regardless of how you feel, if God is with you, he's also for you. And if he's for you, who can be against you? That also includes ourselves. All you need to do, and all I have to learn how to do, is give God a crack. That's it. Give him a crack in the armor that you've tried to put on and watch what he does. Give him a sliver and watch how he gets in there. The problem is we think that God only does the miraculous. The miraculous is that we're sitting here still. If I told you my entire story, it's miraculous that I'm here today. If you knew what I did before I was converted, it's miraculous that I'm not in prison. It's miraculous that I'm not dead. It's miraculous that I'm sitting here in Maryland and not in California. That's a miracle. That was my wife. See, but Joseph should be a great encouragement to us. Though he went through so much, God was with him. God was with him. And then the other portion of his story is this. Not only was God with him, he acted like it. Do we act like God is with us? I know I don't. I might get it once, 1 out of 10. I might get it right. 1 out of 10 times, I'm walking in the areas that God wants me to walk in with the boldness, the humility, the compassion, the love, the grace, the mercy, the gentleness, the kindness, the goodness, the faithfulness, and all of that wrapped up into one. And I finally got it right, and then the very next moment I fall. But that's just me. We got perfect Christians in here, right? Everybody. But the reality is this. How many times could have Joseph said, nah, I'm done? I mean, because he was fly, right? He had his fly jacket on, right? He had a personalized jacket that not only said that he was the favorite, but that he was favored, right? Not just the favorite to the dad, but that he was first in line. Though, at one point, he was the youngest. That shouldn't happen in that cultural context. You ever felt like what you're dealing with should not be happening to you? If anybody's ever had a sickness that took a long time, that's how I felt when I was in the emergency room, too weak to stand, and having two men lift me up out of a wheelchair to set me on a bed. And yet, when many of you see me, you're like, yo, there's no way that dude's not strong enough to stand. See, God had to show me that if I don't humble myself, he will humble me. And in the areas where I think I'm strong, he's like, this is where I want to work the most. So today we're going to quickly talk about changing our perspective to the proper perspective and how we do it. Because if Joseph would have been in line with everything that was going on, he should have been angry. He should have never forgiven his brothers. But what if Joseph understood something that he wants us to learn from him? What if Joseph's life is a perfect picture of how we ought to see our past? Because we all know what Joseph did in the end, but I wish I was in those rooms with him to hear how he was praying, how he was processing the pain. See, sometimes I wish that God would have let us pull back the curtain and hear his tears and hear his moans and his concerns. Because there's no way that he didn't pray. There's no way that he didn't cry out to God. He traveled on foot in the desert to Egypt from where he was, hundreds of miles. I don't know about you guys. I don't walk barefoot out in the summer on the ground for nothing. And if you ever go to the beach in the summertime, that sand can get hot. But see, in that part of the world, that sand can blister your feet almost instantly. And he didn't complain. So I want us to look at Genesis chapter 50. So if you have your Bibles. 2 verses. One we're very familiar with, and the second one, I think we read over too quickly. Genesis 50. 50. First book, last chapter of the first book. If you got it, say, I got it. All right, that's enough. So Genesis chapter 50, and we're going to scroll, or we're going to move our finger down, and we're going to start at verse 19. This is where we're going to check perspective first. And it says, for verse 19, it says, but Joseph said to them, now understand, this is where his brothers are standing before him. Daddy's already dead, so the protection that the brothers felt they had is gone. Let me set that stage for you. Daddy's gone. We're standing in front of the guy that we sold into slavery and didn't have to protect them. And yet, it says, Joseph said to them, do not fear. In the Kennedy translation, it would be, chill out. Do not fear. And he asked them a question. Watch this. For am I in the place of God? You ever gone through something and thought you were the one that was supposed to repay? But what does the Bible say? That the Lord repays. Vengeance is the Lord's. But I know I do, because my personality is to be very direct and go at people and to make sure they know how they made me feel and how they're not going to do that again. And yet, Joseph had every right. And he said, am I in the place of God? Fear not. I'm not God. And he says, as for you, you meant evil against me. You meant it. This wasn't an accident. It's different when somebody makes a mistake. They meant to sell them into slavery. They meant him to throw him in that cistern. They meant to strip him of his custom coat and tear it apart and pour blood all over it and take it to their father and say, look, see what happened? An animal killed him. They meant to do it. It was on purpose. But watch this. But God. I love those two words. But God meant it for good. Wait. He already said he's not in the place of God. And now he says, look, what you did to me, you thought that you planned that up. No, God used that. Now watch, let's keep reading. It says, but God meant it for good to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear. I will provide for you and your little ones. Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Here are a few things I want us to look at. We are not God. God is in control. So no matter what you've been through, though it may have been tough, and I'm so sorry, because I know there are testimonies in here that are mind-blowing. And many times we look at the person and we say, how could you? I can't believe. Why would you? But we have to learn how to shift our perspective. Because if we say that God is sovereign, then it also means he's in control. So if it happened, he's going to repurpose what happened for your good and for his glory. But we have to be people that are okay with God getting the glory. Many times I want the glory for myself. Many times I want to feel good about an outcome, and God's like, it's not about your outcome. It is about God being glorified. Picture this. Put your hands out. Now the world is in your hand. The world to us is huge. But the Bible tells us that God holds the world in the span of his hand. Not only does he hold it, he controls it, and everything that happens on earth, he's aware of. So much so that if a sparrow falls out of the sky, he knows. Every hair on our heads, and when they fall out, he knows. But sometimes, something hurts so bad that we forget that God is in control. Not only is he in control, he sees us right where we're at. That nothing has happened that he's not aware of, and that he doesn't want to bring about for his glory. See, I should hate my mother for how she abused me as a child and how she kicked me out at 16. But if you guys met my mother just last month, you saw me and her, and my wife has watched us grow. We're tighter than ever by the grace of God. Because I had to stop seeing my mother with my expectations and understand her limitations. When we understand people's limitations, that means we've understood ours. Because sometimes we're so hurt that we only see other people's wrongs and we forget how sinful we are. So when we change our perspective, we stop looking at people's shortcomings and understand our own, and we begin to understand that through God's sovereignty, there's nothing impossible with him. I know some of the testimonies in here, and I know some of the situations that people are working through and have worked through. And I can tell you it is only by the grace of God that some of you guys are sitting in here right now. But if the situation that broke you kept you, it not only destroyed you, but it destroys any opportunity that God has for you and that situation to be reconciled. So we're talking about Joseph and how he forgave his brothers. Not only did he forgive them, his perspective had to change. Yes, forgive, but your perspective has to change. As you forgive, we have to begin to see the bigger picture. And that would mean we have to step out of the way. Because no matter what it feels like, and no matter what we've gone through, in the face of things, it hurts. Because look, when's the last time somebody hurt you and your first response was, God bless you? I'm not talking about like a sneeze and like a booger got on you, where like you said God bless you just because that's what we do, even though a booger just landed right on your cheek. But somebody did something, and immediately you said, God bless you, how can I help you? Or, that hurt, but I'm not going to hold that against you. Nor did he. See, when we talk about the gospel, my question is not that if you can articulate it, can you walk it out? Can you walk out that the sins have been paid for, and while Jesus was on that cross, he said, forgive them. What's the last part? For they know not what they do. And I submit this to you, just as a thought. When people hurt us, do they really know what they're doing? I'm a parent. My kids frustrate me a lot. And one thing they're teaching me is even on their best day, there's so much that they don't know. And then it turns into this beautiful mirror, and I'm like, that's ugly. You guys ever did that? Something happens, and instead of looking at the person immediately, you have this mirror that says, I know how I could have done that too. You put me in that situation, I probably would have responded the same way. But then that would mean our perspective shifted. That would mean that we were working on compassion. That would mean that we would understand that love requires sacrifice, and sacrifice sucks. Sacrifice doesn't feel good. Sacrifice tears things out of you and pierces you in places that are so vulnerable. Sacrifice means that you're going to give of yourself even if you don't feel like you have it. You ever just pictured that walk that Jesus had after being ripped to shreds, having to carry a cross? The passion of the Christ couldn't even do it justice. Historians believe that he was unrecognizable even to his mother. And everybody knows. A mama knows his baby. Mama knows her baby no matter what. But what was done to his body and parts of his face, he was so mutilated that he was unrecognizable and lost so much blood. I don't know about you guys, but when I get my blood drawn, I'm weak for a few hours. But he had to carry the cross still. So we talk about what happened spiritually. Think about it physically for a moment. That cross was a torturous way to die. It was meant for you to suffer. That's why they would put your feet together, overlap them, put a stake through one that drove all the way through to the second one, and he perched you up through your wrists to hold you, bind you by your arms to make sure you couldn't get loose and that you wouldn't fall, in hopes that you would suffer and gag and gurgle on the blood that was filling up in your lungs. And you would stay there for hours. And the only way you could breathe is to push up against the very thing that was piercing your feet, and he never stopped until it was done. With the joy set before him, he endured the cross. Brothers and sisters, we have come through a very tough season here and Oasis, on Eastern Shore, in this country, in this world. But there are even more tough seasons that have never even been discussed in here. And if we're ever going to get to a place of truly being a family, we're going to have to change our perspective on how we were hurt and free the people that hurt us. That's one. Let me say that again. Free the people that hurt you. How do we do that? So glad you asked. Like Joseph, he had to forgive. Forgiveness, yes, frees you, but it also cuts the cord that the enemy uses to draw those feelings up out of you every time the person or the circumstance is mentioned. So when you forgive, you're not completely done, but the process of being healed from that moment is what allows us to move forward. Oh, what's the second part? Glad you asked. So after forgiving and after being freed is to change your outlook on the situation with God in mind. So yes, we're free. Yes, we've forgiven, but now we have to change the way we see it. I remember talking through my child abuse with my pastor in California. And that's where the analogy of the bungee cord came in. Every time I discussed being choked, being slapped, being thrown, being kicked, being punched, it would bring something up in me. Pure anger and rage. He said, until you truly forgive and cut that cord, you can never move into the purpose that God has for you because you'll never see it. We have to invite God into those circumstances. Somebody's not talking to you right. Instead of talking to them first, talk to God. Somebody did you wrong. Talk to God first. Well, first, forgive, get free. That conversation has to be with God. God, whatever happened, since you are in control. Let's say that together, because I don't know how many times we use that verbiage. Since you're in control. Right? Since God is in control, I believe, and that's the third part. Forgive and heal. Change your perspective. And that last part. After you understand that God is in control, you can move. You can move forward. Some of the greatest traumas that I've ever had to work with or work through, I've learned to see God's grace and providence through it. Had I stayed in the household that I was raised in, I know I would have been a drug dealer. I would have sold more drugs than I did. I probably would have used more drugs than I did. I probably would have been pimping a whole lot younger. I sure enough would have been ripping and running the streets and hurting people a whole lot more. And the last straw before I finally surrendered, instead of allowing someone else to shoot up that car, it would have been me. See, don't think that God can't use you just because you have a dark past. God definitely wants to use you, especially because of that dark past. Because we can have a bunch of churched folks that have never seen the goodness of God because they're unwilling to change their perspective. Because we've lived in a culture, in a Christian culture, that has been so legalistic that they're unwilling to do anything different. See, a lot of times we think legalism, we're like, oh, we got to worship this way, we read our Bibles this way, we pray this way. That's not it. That's not just the part of legalism that I'm talking about. Legalism is a regimented lifestyle that outside of that regiment, you're wrong. You got tattoos? You're outside the regiment for some. You don't wear a three-piece suit on Sunday? You outside of a regiment for some. You got a preacher up there with a T-shirt on and some Timbs? You're outside of the regiment. We laugh, but what thing has kept us from seeing God's goodness and drawing us into the perfection of His will that our past is responsible for? Can I be brutally honest with you? Is that okay? Some of you guys, I do not mean to offend, but if I'm going to be completely honest with you, I should hate white people for what was done to me as a child. For the knives put to my throat and the names that I was called and the cross burnt on my front lawn. Though my mother was white. The Ku Klux Klan that shot at my sister when she was such a little girl. And the times I had to stay in my hotel during a basketball tournament where they said, you better not go outside when it starts getting dark because there's a Klan meeting happening tonight. And for you guys that know me, it's not a hateful bone in my body. But that's by the grace of God. My perspective had to change. That alcoholic mother that I had to understand that she couldn't do any better. Brokenness only begets brokenness, and brokenness doesn't heal until the providence of God is understood and they begin to walk in it. Hurt people. We've heard it all the time, but many times we expect hurt people to treat us differently when we haven't even received them any differently. You ever had a family member steal from you? And then you get done with them and you're like, I'm better off. Why were they stealing? Different perspective. And so today, I'm going to conclude with this. Many of us, me included, don't ever want you to hear anything from me that I haven't had to have a conversation with myself about first. Many of us can't accept or see the sovereignty of God. Some of us are just unwilling to believe that there's a God that controls everything. And then a step after that is you believe there is a God, but you don't believe that He controls anything in your life and just believes that you're on an island by yourself. And then the last one is you believe that God is God, that He is sovereign, and that He is with you at all times. But you're unwilling to be moved because you're paralyzed in His strength and unwilling to use the strength that He gave you. So I close out with a question. If God is sovereign in your life, what areas do you need Him to change your perspective in? If God is sovereign in your life, what areas do you need Him to help you change your perspective? I think this is a perfect time for us to take communion. While the elements are going around, I want us to take a moment, and you have your elements. Close your eyes. Take a moment. ask God, what areas in my life am I seeing wrong? What things in my past am I still looking at improperly? What people do I need to forgive and release to you? Father God, we all have areas that we need to present to you. As we prepare to take the elements that help us remember who Jesus is and what was done for us, your word says that we should love our neighbor as ourselves. We ask you, even in the Lord's Prayer, to forgive us our trespasses as we forgive them that have trespassed against us. So, Father, if there's any area in us today that we have not given to you, we have not relinquished, we have not confessed, search us. Bring it forward, Father, so we can lay it at your feet. Step away and have a different perspective on the person or the matter, so that we can be free, so that we can see who you are in our lives and how you've been there since the beginning. Comfort us, Father. Give us strength to walk in those areas boldly, full of grace, mercy, and compassion. In Jesus' name, amen. Now we take the bread, which represents his body, which was broken for us. And this body that was broken for us, the beauty of it is that he never relinquished, he never quit. And so the bread, though we will chew it and it's gone because it only represents something that will never leave, understand when we take it, it is to help us remember what he went through for us. Take and eat. Now this juice represents his blood. And I've often just said that it's the blood that was poured out for us to wash away sin and for us to be seen through his blood. But I want us to think about the blood itself, the blood that was shed for us, what Jesus went through, every drop that he spilled. And those drops were for us. So as we drink this, understand how valuable you really are. That our Lord and Savior would be willing to spill his blood for you and for me. Take and drink. That is clearly the alarm for the end of the service. Brothers and sisters, I love you. We here at Oasis love you. And as you leave this week, as you leave and go into this week, find someone to connect with. Set a lunch date. Set a coffee date. Set a time to get together. Because if we're going to be family, time is the only real investment that's required. Go in peace. May God bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you. Have a good Sunday.